Welcome everyone to a very special CFO Connect webinar. This session is all about embracing equity, which is the theme of International Women's Day in 2023 that we celebrated last week. But Women's History Month is the entire month of March. And this, of course, embracing equity is a topic that we all want to keep top of mind throughout the entire fiscal year. So we are here with an incredible panel of women leaders, Valnavia, Solen, and Joyce, and each of them will introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we get into the fun stuff, let's give the latecomers a couple of minutes to join and to log on. And while we're waiting, if you've been to a CFO Connect webinar before, you probably know the drill. On the bottom right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat button. So go ahead and send a message into the chat. You can introduce yourself and tell us where in the world you're tuning in from. So I'm in Paris. I know that CFO Connect members are all over the world. We have over 9,000 of you, and it's always so fun to see just how many time zones we're in on this one call. So let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. Hi, Lena from Berlin. Rashmita from London, welcome. Cheryl from London, Cindy Amsterdam. Sarah from Ohio, hi Sarah. Arizona, Kelsey. Celia from Paris. Fabulous. Thank you. So cool to see. We are in so many different countries. So thank you very much. Keep introducing yourself as you come in. And bonus points, if there is something in the session that you really want to get out of it, or a topic that you really want the speakers to talk about, let us know in the chat as well, because we want this to be really interactive, and feel free to let us know. So on to the next very important point is that right next to the chat tab that you're in now, we also have a questions tab. And like I said, throughout the session, ask any questions that you would really like our panelists to answer. And we can either do this very interactively, but in any case, we are saving some time at the end of the session dedicated specifically to Q&A. So make sure you know where that questions tab is and that you can ask your questions right in there. So a quick introduction from me. My name is Alejandra, and I am on the community team at CFO Connect. CFO Connect is a global community of finance leaders. And as a finance community, we host events and workshops like this one. We also have a private Slack group for CFOs, and we curate excellent content specifically for finance leaders, which is designed to help you level up in your career and be the best leader that you can be. And CFO Connect is a community created by Spendesk, which is a 7-in-1 span management solution that was built and designed specifically for modern finance teams. And what's great about Spendesk is that, especially in these times, it helps finance stay in complete control and have total visibility over everything that's spent. So this is crucial in today's climate, and it's just a game changer for finance teams. So if you would like to learn more, go to spendesk.com. You can see in the chat tab, you have the links for both CFO Connect and Spendesk. Last piece of information, this session is being recorded. So if you have an emergency and you need to go, we will have this session available for you later. And without further ado, we are here with our three very special guests, Valnavia, Solen, and Joyce. So Valnavia, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Alejandra, and hello to everybody that's tuned in. My name is Valnavia, and I'm calling in from Cape Town. I see there's no one else from Africa, it seems, but that's okay. I'll represent the continent. And I am head of finance at Bash, which specializes on omni-channel technology. It is part of a listed retail entity, and our mandate is basically to make fashion available to people wherever it is they are. I have 14 years experience in finance, and I've worked from across different sectors, specializing in the past 5 in e-commerce technology. And I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. So Len?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this event. So Solène, I'm working as an investor at Balderton Capital. It's a VC fund based in London, but investing in European founders. So we invest from seed to Series C in various different types of sectors. So fintech, we invested in Revolut, GoCardless, but also retail with Vestiaire Collective, Depop, cybersecurity, food, climate. So very broad. Before that, I was working as an investor in another VC fund, but investing only in fintech and insurtech. But yeah, so that's it. And calling from Paris, but I'm usually based in London.
Thank you, Solène. And last but certainly not least, Joyce, tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Joyce. I'm Canadian by background and accent. I've been a practitioner and a lifelong student of finance for the past 20 years. I've worn different hats during that time period, started my career in corporate finance, did banking, private equity, VC, and started Pega Fund about 3 years ago. And what we do is we provide fractional CFO services to institutionally backed VC and growth equity backed SaaS businesses. And we help make their finance teams the most valuable, or one of the most valuable, I should say, parts of the organization. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. We are so happy that you are all here. And I think what's super exciting about this panel is that each of you are playing a different role. So we have Solène, who can tell us about, from the VC perspective, we have Valnavia, who's in-house, and then we have Joyce, who is doing CFO as a service. So we're going to have like many different perspectives, and I'm just excited to hear what you have to say. So let's get into it. My first question for you, and let's give this one to Valnavia. How does your organization at Bash, how do you encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization? And what are the practical steps or actions that you're taking to make this happen?
Thanks, Alejandra. I think what's important is that, you know, I am in South Africa, and I think most of your listeners know and understand that we have a history of apartheid. And so that is something that corporations and government specifically have been trying to right for the past 28 years. Now, how it's manifested is that we have tried to address this legacy through the Constitution. And you'll know that South Africa's Constitution is rated amongst the best in the world. And what it does is that the government has published specific regulations known as BBBE regulations. And those try then to redress specific equity-related matters around employment, ownership, supply chain management, and previously disadvantaged groups within society. The approach itself, it's scorecard-based, and any entity, especially a listed one as this, basically what we try and vie for is bragging rights. And so my company has taken this initiative, and then it looks at different dimensions across ownership, management, skills development, socio-development, and what I'm trying to make this as practical as possible for everyone. But what we then do is, using that scorecard, we identify and earmark projects that are going to give us the highest score, which in turn allows us to redress these issues. And so the advantage we have, or disadvantage in some instances, is that this is a government mandated protocol for a listed company as ours. So we have almost no choice in doing it, but equally it's important, and TFG realizes that. TFG is our holding company. It realizes that, and so annually we publish specific mandates and standards that we need to hit ourselves. And so at a step-by-step level, we take what the government, through the Constitution, through these protocols, what they determine as important, and then we see how we can practically address it internally. Being a fashion and lifestyle company, it's important to note that our supply chain is broad and it's wide, and our impact is really quite huge, right? We import from China, but importantly, we manufacture and we distribute to the customer by ourselves. And so every initiative that we have is applied across that supply chain to make sure that at least at an impact level, we identify where the most help at a previously disadvantaged level is needed, and we make that part of our strategic initiatives.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And Solène, I'm curious because only 8% of venture capitalists are women. So what role does diversity and inclusion play at Balderton Capital?
Yeah, so actually there are a bunch of ways as an investor, as a VC fund, we can have impact and implement D&I initiatives. And I think, as you mentioned, I think the first one will be for our own operations and team. And maybe to give you a practical example for our recruiting process, we are actually using Testgorilla. So it's an online skills assessment platform to allow us to not have any bias in our recruiting process. So it's basically like tests, but we cannot have a look at the gender or also the socioeconomic background. We can only see the answer to this test. So basically it allows to have like to remove all the bias related to socioeconomic and gender issues. Also, I think one other important way we can have impact is regarding our sourcing and investment decision process. So for our sourcing, there are a bunch of initiatives for women founders. Actually, I'm participating to Playfair female founder office hours only for women that can talk with VCs during like 4 hours. So it's like 50 minutes speed dating for women founders only. And also for investment decision, we always include a diversity slide in our investment memo. So basically we assess like the number of women founders in the team, and we try to track those data in the long run. We have actually like our SFG report that we do annually, so Sustainable Future Goals report. So we monitor specific OKRs for our portfolio companies. I think a third way would be like the general contribution that we can do for the overall industry. So we at Balderton are organizing a bunch of breakfasts, women in VC breakfasts. So we invite like women partners to talk about specific topics like partner track, or how to build a diverse team, how to source women or underrepresented founders. So that's it for the general industry part. And I think last one will be how we can encourage our portfolio companies to actually implement D&I initiatives. Because one thing that is amazing with VC is that you back very early stage companies. And if you help them implement D&I initiatives from day one, you can have a very big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. It's all about how you're starting, and that's what determines how you're scaling. Really interesting. Thank you. And Joyce, so you work with many different companies. And so I'm curious to hear how diversity, equity, and inclusion manifests differently based on the organization that you're working with. And I would also like to know if this is generally a big priority for finance teams.
I think that's a great question. So if we take firstly a step back, I think any sort of systems change, which is things like, removing subconscious bias and structures in place that have allowed things to operate a certain way, is much easier to do in a smaller company environment, like such as a startup, than in a corporate or in a country even. And to be able to even start doing the systems change, you need to think about first, how can you provide access to people that are underrepresented? then it's about visibility and having role models of people within leadership roles. And lastly, it's supporting all of that through data. So actually looking at business performance and how D&I is contributing to, higher growth, more efficient businesses, more value creation overall in a company environment. And I would say with some of the companies that we've worked with, one classic example is, we worked with a company that was bootstrapped for many, many years, and they decided then to take on venture funding. And one of the key priorities for the founder CEO from day one is to always have 50-50 representation on the leadership team. And so they had, when they went out to recruit, they said, okay, we're going to make sure that our management team, our leadership team is 50% women, 50% men. That has since transpired to the rest of the organization. And they've been able to maintain that as they continue to grow and scale. Another example is I recently read a report that talked about how if you look at some of the top performing European SaaS companies out there today that have received funding, the ones that are performing in the top quartile, meaning the top 25% of growth and overall business performance, actually has more female executives as an overall percentage of the company. So that's like the data out there is illustrating that actually diversity, and I think diversity not just from a gender sense, but from a broader education, background, thought, and experience contributes overall to greater value creation. So it's really, to do systems change, you need all the participants to move things forward. And that includes really thinking about things from a holistic point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what leaders are in a position to change on an organization level. So yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true what you've said, that women-led companies, the data shows that they tend to outperform those led by men. So Len, do you discuss or do you prioritize women founders with your portfolio companies?
Yeah, so basically, I think that with our portfolio companies, we try to make them understand that it is really important to, one, have a diverse management team, leadership team, and to have a diverse board. So we cannot force them, but we can encourage them in different ways. So first thing would be to help them with recruiting. So we have dedicated people in our team, so not part of the investment team, but actually like dedicated to help them source more diverse profiles for their leadership team. And also our partners that are at the board are also helping the CEOs to meet with more diverse advisors. Because maybe to give you a bit of context, but today 87% of our portfolio companies have at least one woman in the leadership team, and 36% of our portfolio companies have at least one woman at the board. So this is also like statistics that we want to track and progress on. So our objectives are for like the first one. So leadership team will be to reach 100% of our portfolio companies with at least one woman in the leadership team, and 50% of our portfolio companies with at least one woman at the board. So those are part of our own OKRs. So that's why we are pushing our CEOs and our portfolio companies to do efforts as well, because we are publishing those reports annually. But yeah, I think it's like recruiting, helping them like on a daily basis. Our partners are like talking to the CEOs very frequently. And as I mentioned, I think starting from day one is always easier. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that it's built into your OKRs, I think this component of accountability is essential when we're talking about this type of situation. So yeah, that's a really good practical tip. And do you expect those numbers that you're tracking, do you expect them to trend in a positive direction in the near future? Or are these projections, are you looking at reaching your goals like in 10 years or 15 years?
I think I think it takes time, for sure, especially when you're looking at leadership and boards and board members, because first of all, like the churn rate is pretty low. Nobody is leaving a leadership team or a board very, very frequently. So you can hire new people, but when it comes to board and leadership team, it takes time. But of course, for new portfolio companies, yeah, that's something. And usually they are early stage because we invest at early stage. This is something that we push for. So I guess that we expect it to like improve year on year, but how fast it will be, that's a good question. I think it takes time.
Yeah, I think so too. But we're all here and I think we're all working towards the same goal. So thank you for sharing your practical tips. I'm curious to know, what are some of the specific challenges that you've encountered when trying to promote diversity and inclusion in the finance industry, and what you've done to address these challenges, whether it was successful or not? So Valnavia, do you want to take this one?
Yes, this is an interesting one because, I am a part of an African society which is strongly patriarchal. And you find, that's probably a lot of societies across the world, shock or a shock. But I think what's significant about it is that there is this concept that we call the plight of the girl child, specifically within sub-Saharan Africa. And how it manifests is that the girl child is not seen as a contributor to society, because ultimately the view is she will get married. And so anything that you do, any investment that you'll place in her, she'll get married and go away and benefit her husband's family. Right. Now, if you think about that in terms of what I said earlier about the government putting in place specific laws and specific regulations, what you then have is a failure to comply because there's not enough. Corporate answer is that there's not enough women available at an aptitude level as well as at the right level of education. And that is a sociocultural problem for us. So practically, that's a challenge that we faced. And then the question is, how do you then address it? Because factually speaking, in order for you to be able to comply, it's going to take a knock on your bottom line, right? And in a capitalistic society, the bottom line always prevails. And so it is up to a specific kind of corporate to actually go down to grassroots and pull that girl child up, right? That is an incredibly, incredibly difficult task, because what you are facing is years of tradition, it is years of culture, and it's basically gender roles that were predefined long before businesses even started. And so for us, I think where it starts is really education from the moment children, young boys, young men enter the the school system, to try and say, how do you make sure that they understand the importance of the girl child and the benefits of actually doing this? And so some of the initiatives that we have go all the way down to primary schools, because if we do not find a way to change this at a grassroots level, we can talk about compliance all we want. We can talk about these socio-responsibility initiatives that we have, but they're going to come to naught, right? And so it's not enough for us to say we want to comply. It's not enough to say we're going to catch them at a specific level, because we have to go all the way down to birth and say this child is very important. And that's also part of why the government's role is super important, because you cannot do this on your own. It's not enough for corporate to want to do it. It's not enough for government to just legislate. It's a Herculean task and a Herculean effort to say, let us bring everybody to at least an equitable starting point to even start having discussions about equity. So to answer your question, summary, TLDR is it's very difficult, and it'll take time and it takes quite a lot of partnership. It's not for one entity to do by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like it takes courageous leadership as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it too. And this question can be for you or it can be for anyone else.
Sure.
How do the challenges to implementing measures for DE&I compound for women who are visible minorities or historically disadvantaged?
I mean, I'm sure the others can answer as well because it's such a hefty question. But over the weekend in preparation for this, I came upon a Netflix documentary on women and the gender pay gap. And one of the important things they said was that if there's not a lot of you, right, within a workplace, you actually don't have any lobbying leverage. Right. So you can actually be unseen, you can be ignored because corporate works on 80-20 rules. And so those 80-20 rules will always say, you know what, let's ignore this subset. Let's focus on these ones because these guys are more. And it's usually guys, right? And in South Africa, being an African country, you would think that for us, it compounds. There's the racial dynamics of it, and then there's the gender dynamics of it. You would think being an African country that in the workplace, you would have more Black people. You have more white people within the workplace. So you have this skewing of the population represented within corporate, where you have 10% of the population probably makes up 80% of the workforce. Right. So when you enter, and especially if you are a woman of color, you're already a minority within that place. And you're a minority based on a system that was put in place years before you even entered. So one has to battle against the legacy and the norms that were created during apartheid, the legacy and the norms that are created socially and culturally, and then effectively, you know, you guys have heard it all before, you come across as being super aggressive, right? Because you have to fight for an entire population here. You come across as being super aggressive, super confrontational, when all you're trying to be is absolutely heard. Yeah. So those are some of the challenges, and it would be remiss of me to say this is let's say at a BASH level. This is almost at every single entity where I have entered and I have worked at. This is a systemic issue that has to actually be dealt with. It's a real challenge.
Yes, absolutely. And when you are historically disadvantaged or a visible minority, I think, like you mentioned, it's about sticking together. Because one person can absolutely not do it alone, and that is the power of community and of having that strong network. Joyce, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think what you said, Alejandra, and also Vonovia is like spot on, which is you need to have the power of community, but also common language. And there's very few common languages in the world today. Right. So we're not talking about English. We're talking about things like sports, music, and ultimately finance. Finance is a common language that's spoken by every country, every business, every individual. And so it goes back to, you know, if you look at the whole pipeline of, let's talk from a business point of view, leads to sales and ultimately to conversion of women in leadership roles, of diversity in leadership roles, you need to start at the very beginning, which is to be able to empower people with the common language of understanding basic financial literacy. How do you read the 3 financial statements? How do you create a personal budget? You know, how do you think about how this then impacts how you communicate with your counterpart in other departments within the household? When you start thinking about, you know, future planning, having kids, like even that discussion between, you know, if you're in a man and woman kind of relationship, that's even in itself manifests, right? So I think a lot of it goes back to the fundamentals of like Do you understand where money comes from, how it's being spent, how you invest money, how are you doing that within a certain time frame? And once you up level everyone to the same page in terms of speaking a common language, then it's much easier to have proper discussions around it. But it is difficult because in the, you know, in a world of let's say the law of small numbers, which is there are very few women in senior leadership roles, it's like, okay, you're always going to be an outlier. And if, to Vanovia's point, if a business is set up to cater towards the average or the norm, then you're always going to be on some side of the standard deviation. And so you need to be armed with not only the data, but also the people behind you who can support you, who can lift you, who can put you in a position where you have the influence to make a greater impact to the next generation and to that next level of leadership.
Thank you. Yeah, really nice. And to your point about maternity, I was wondering actually, because at Spendesk, we're in discussions about our maternity and paternity packages and how we maybe want to improve them. So I'm curious how that plays out at your companies. And so anyone, feel free to take this one. If you've seen good examples, if you've seen bad examples.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, no, maybe one thing at Balderton. So basically, like men and women have the same time for paternity and maternity leaves, and they strongly encourage the fathers to actually take their paternity leaves of 6 months. And I think that's really great, because as a woman, it's also a positive thing if men have like a significant amount of time after the birth of a child, so that we are not the only ones taking some time off. And I think it's really good to encourage that. I know that in France, there are a lot of new regulations, and there were a lot of debates regarding paternity leave as well. And the tech community was strongly supporting the paternity leave. So yeah, I think that's there are positive things happening.
Yeah, I think so too. Right now, it's an interesting time because things are really evolving.
Yeah.
We do not have that, guys. We do not have that. So men can take, I believe it's 10 days, and women can take up to 4 months. But again, this is not, so for 10 days, it's fully paid up. The 4 months are not fully paid up. And so in an economy where, you know, you don't have so much purchasing power, you can't take the full 4 months. So depending on your financial needs and where you are, so it's a class thing again, you take however much you can afford. And for some people, it's not a lot. For some people, it's like, you know what, I'll do it for a month. This is how much I can bear, because perhaps I get a 66% of my salary, and then it whittles down as the time frame goes. So I'm hopeful. I can't speak on behalf of the government. It now comes down to a company policy discussion. And with high levels of unemployment, it is very difficult for corporations to find themselves justifying this, because as far as they're concerned, they want you in, bum and seat, and doing the work.
Yeah, I think it's
like a Debbie Downer.
No, but I sort of completely agree with you, because I think there's the kind of idealistic, what we would like to see in a perfect world, and then there's the reality of what how the systems have been currently set up. And I think across Europe, with the exception of maybe Sweden and Germany as well, I think is starting to change. Most countries don't have maternity or paternity policies in place that make it equal for the man and the woman. Nor do they have, not just beyond kind of, how do I say, sort of compensation from the government, which oftentimes is very minimal, to be candid. It doesn't even cover the cost of like daycare for a child if you're looking at high quality sort of daycare. it's also the systems around it, right? So the support services, the making flexible work, being able to have hybrid work environments, which we're fortunate to, and if we work in the tech startup environment. But if you think traditional industry where you need to go into the office or a physical space 5 days a week, it's a little bit hard to manage with, a 2-year-old child that's needs constant feeding and attention. So I think it's, going back to the earlier point, it's around like removing the points of subconscious bias, which starts with access and understanding. Then it's about systemic change, which is across the whole ecosystem, right? From governments to corporates to startups and all the people that can lobby against it. And then it's having really like benchmarks and role models in place that you can aspire towards. Yeah. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, but it's definitely worth the effort.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So let's talk about compensation. So CFO Connect, every year we publish a CFO salary benchmark. And when we did it last year in 2022, we found that men in finance on average earn 13% more than their women counterparts. And that number was up to 30% in some countries. And for information, our sample is largely people from modern companies, a lot of tech, with perhaps more of a focus on diversity. And so we suspect that the gap could be even larger outside of our sample. So what strategies do you use to monitor or address pay gaps within your organization? And I'd also like to know what you can do as a leader or a manager, for example, if you have direct reports, to help close this pay gap. Joyce?
Yes. So I think there's two aspects of it. There's the quantitative, which is having the data and benchmarks to support what, call it different types of roles, skills warrant. And if you do that on a blindfold basis, which is, gender neutral, but focusing on even arguably education background neutral, then I think there's a lot of value in that, because ultimately you're focused on meritocracy and performance rather than the individual and how they contribute to the business overall. So that's the kind of quantitative analytical approach and thing to consider. So things like making, for instance, I know Spendesk and CFO Connect publishes compensation reports every year. That's very helpful, right? Even just having data out there to say, okay, last year it was this, okay, inflation this year is this, therefore we need to increase the numbers by at least this much. That's just, it's hard to argue with data. I think the second aspect is the more softer qualitative, which is having the communication and negotiation skills to ask for what you deserve. And there I have to say, like, even as a woman for many, many years, and I would say some of my peers are the same, there's often this, our own bias against ourselves, where, it feels that it's almost like we need to prove that we have earned it and go above and beyond to really demonstrate that that's, we get a seat at the table and that we should get this much salary or equity. But men don't do that. And, I've worked with mostly men for the last 20 years, having been in finance and tech, and men just they go after it. They may not even have the skills or they've delivered on it necessarily, but they do it. So I think having that, I call it unapologetic boldness to go after what it is that you deserve, not necessarily have earned the right to, but also building those soft skills, which, an executive coach or having a mentor or advisor can be really helpful for, to go after what it is that you want is something that also, I think in a way, women can aspire towards, to learn from men in the same way that men can learn from women in terms of some of the more softer modern approach to leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. We are just as much subject to bias as everyone else is. Bias that we did not consent to have, but here we are. So we do have to really fight against that ourselves as well. So Len or Valnavia, would you like to add anything? No? Okay.
Completely agree with you, Joyce. So nothing to add.
Okay.
Yeah, it's we can't over litigate it. It's
Yeah.
everything she said.
Yeah, perfect. My next question is, what can you do today? So our community is mostly finance leaders, CFOs, VPs, head of finance. So it's a community of people with influence who are leaders. So I'd like for you to share an idea for how our audience watching, what is one thing they can do today, a step they can take or an action to empower others to move this issue forward.
I'd like to just something Joyce touched on earlier, and I think partly you did on, it's we band together. There's this concept of us needing to band together, but I saw someone asked me a question about how rocky it's been, and I thought a little bit about that, and I realized what I have had, and I think what a lot of women need is some kind of champion. It is impossible for you to get through on your own, because it's already, if as a woman you are a minority of sorts, you are incredibly different. The status quo has been set, so anything, even your brand of leadership, your brand of doing things, it's going to be seen as different. And as human beings, we don't like different any sorts, right? And so it's important for, almost at a hero level, I'm sure most of our listeners like fantasy, to have one who rises from amongst the mob to champion the cause of someone they see as, you see a star and you acknowledge that person from a merit level, and you acknowledge them in spite of the fact that perhaps there is someone else that that is the same, and you fight against your biases, and maybe you do it as maybe like just a social experiment. Pick a woman amongst the horde and be their champion. It is so very important, and data around women just needing a champion and excelling when they find a champion, there's a lot of it. I read a Harvard Business Review article that said the one thing that sets us apart is actually at a gender level, not race, not anything like that. It's the way women act, and the way men act in any territory is more or less the same. And women like to know that they're amongst friends. They're not competitive for competition's sake. So just knowing you have one friend, one friendly face, that's important.
Yeah.
That was important to me, especially.
I completely agree. And I think that, the more senior you are, the more support you can give to the more junior people in your company. And I think, and maybe it's even more true for women, but I think we might need more validation and some proof of credibility sometimes. And I know that, one of my partner at Balderton, Rana, she's always like giving credibility to the more junior people, saying, yeah, thank you, Solène. Thank you for what you just said. Super useful, super helpful. Just those little things, just showing that what you said was relevant, was like credible, and brought like, interesting thing to the conversation. Just showing it to the group, to the rest of the group, is already like, a small way that you can do to help other women in your organization.
Absolutely. A little goes a long way.
Exactly. Just little goes.
Okay. Go ahead, Joyce.
Sorry, if I can just add one last comment. I was going to say, I think also, I would love in a year, maybe that's overly optimistic, or in 5 or 10 years time, where like a panel like this, we don't need to have anymore, because this is no longer a topic that is something that needs to be front of mind. I think, unfortunately, that isn't yet the reality today, although a lot has changed in the last, 5+ years. One of the things that I personally found very helpful, to your point earlier about, having people that champion you and give you a voice at the table, is I've always sort of had informal mentors or advisors. most of whom, I would say 80-90% are men that are further along in their life and also in their career. And they have supported me not because I'm a woman or because I'm Asian, but just because they've, you know, there's an inherent curiosity or ambition, a growth mindset. And therefore they pave the way for those types of people. So I think identifying those people in your career, also in your personal life, that are 10 years older, that are 20 years older, that have most likely done the mistakes that you're about to make or have made the mistakes that you have already made as well. Those are incredibly valuable because those are the people that are going to open doors for you. They're going to open windows for you. And ultimately, what they get back is also a different perspective that they can then share with, you know, their kids or their grandkids, their partners. I think that's something that's super, super important and valuable because you can't, this whole, you know, discussion about men against women, it doesn't work. Like we all need to kind of work collaboratively together to understand both perspectives. That's the only way you can do systems change.
Absolutely. I agree. So I'm looking at the time and we're quickly running out, but there's one question that I really want each of you to answer. And it's, as a woman and as a finance leader, what is the single best piece of advice that you've gotten that you can share with our audience to take away?
I think related to what just Joyce said is maybe like surrounding yourself with the right people. Who can support and help you along the way.
Thanks, Helen.
For me, it came very recently, actually. It was that I must be very clear on what my purpose is, because all my choices would rise and fall based against that backdrop. And so, you know, it's generic advice, right? I think we all know this. It's like, what is it that you really want? But define your values and be very clear on that. And that will make it easier for you to make decisions, for you to step away or step in. And so that for me has been almost like validation at that is so very obvious. Thank you for that practical life step.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I completely agree. I think values and vision, if you have those two in place, then naturally things will come to you. And if you don't have those in place, then surround yourself with people that are inspirational, that can help you figure out what those are. But I think it goes back to, I think it's a quote by Henry Ford, or, you know, someone who's long dead. But basically they say, you know, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. So think a lot about how you're using your time, what you're investing that time into, and and just really make sure that it's people that you see yourself not only from a professional perspective aligning with, but also from a personal life perspective.
That's a great quote. We are so much more connected than we think. Wonderful. This has been so empowering, so inspiring. I love this conversation. We have lots of questions from the audience. So let's start with Celia. Celia asks, have you had difficulty as a woman getting accepted in your role and responsibilities and having your voice heard? And how did you change that? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
I almost feel like this is a finance in general. Like if most of you work in startups, finance is, and I don't know, Joyce, about you, but finance seems like a grudge purchase in and of itself, right? So the acceptance is really at making sure that, like I've had challenges in making sure that an entrepreneur who has not needed finance understands the role that I'm about to play and the value that they're about to gain. So my challenge has been basically articulating the value of finance. And sometimes, you know, it's very easy to come in because you're almost programmed, because you've been fighting your whole life to say, okay, is this because I'm a woman? And, you know, I think my husband, my would-be mentor, don't tell him I said that, was like, no. He's a consultant. He's like, absolutely not. Finance is a grudge purchase. No one wants it. No one wants to have to deal with tax and compliance matters. So sometimes it's basically, I've had to deal with things through that lens. But more specifically then from a gender perspective, I don't think I've had challenges per se in getting my voice heard. There have been moments where I've had the typical being called out, like be less aggressive, be less abrasive, etc. But that's because I'm quite forthright. Now we go back to the norms that we spoke about, that you're supposed to be a little bit more gentle, but I guarantee you I'm like most of my peers. So the challenge is I've merely ignored them. You know, it comes with the role. If we want to discuss finance as the role of the dragon lady, that's also, you know, some of the nicknames you have coming across in there, because, you know, it's not a nice role. It's not a PR role. It's making sure that the business is sustainable, and that whatever decision we make today, if we look back through a different lens in 10 years' time, it's going to hold, right? And so the role is difficult in and of itself. So sometimes I no longer make a distinction. It's not a female thing. It's the role in itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've worked with lots of different personas, and even though I still wear the finance hat, I think finance is arguably one of the most difficult personas to work with for many different reasons, which we will not get into today. But I think at the end of the day, it's one of the things that have been discussed throughout is like having effective communication, which is very tricky, right? When you're in a remote hybrid environment with different cultures and backgrounds and languages and all that. That is such a important skill set that you learn through experience, through mistakes, and over time. But the more you are effective in being able to connect with someone on a human level, not just from a business profit, growth perspective, but just person to person. How can I help solve your problem? What problems do you have? I think that's how you get heard. You get heard when you listen, and you get heard when you have a different perspective that makes someone pause to think, and they have these aha moments that go off in their brain. Actually being different is not a bad thing at all. Being different makes you stand out from the crowd. And so you should embrace that difference as something that you can leverage and use towards your advantage, as long as you understand where the other person's perspective is coming from as well.
Yeah, and I think like from an investor perspective and a bit more junior, I think the industry has really changed. And so today, the VC and tech industry, I completely feel that my voice is heard, and they clearly encourage like women to speak louder. So no, I feel more encouraged than like, okay, Solène, you should just shut up for what? I mean, not at all. Not in the VC industry today, but I assume that it changed a lot, like over the past 10 years.
Yeah, thank you. And earlier, each of you touched on having champions or having mentors. And Kelsey asks, I'd love to hear tips for finding groups or mentors that have helped you in your career. So we've established the importance of having these things, but how do we actually find them?
You hustle. It's just, sorry, I don't mean to sound. I think for me, it was largely through University Network. That was a big, valuable part of it. So education, going back to education, is really important. And then it's really from the workplace, people that you connect with that are further along in your career. So always try to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. I think one thing, if I could be a bit stereotypical, that women tend to be better at, I would say, not always, but tend to be, is planning. Think of yourself as a business. Where do I want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? How do I put myself in a position where I create the most value for myself, but also for the labor market and the company that I'm operating in? So think ahead, plan ahead, and seek out people that are open to giving their time and their expertise. And I guarantee you there's a lot more people out there willing to do that because they're further in their life, because they're at a point that they don't care about titles or compensation or wealth anymore, that for them it's just about giving back to the next generation. And if you show the willingness to invest in that relationship and also bring something to the table in return, then yeah, you don't even need to call them mentors. They'll be there if you on a WhatsApp call or, you know, through an email that you send at the most critical points in your career and life.
I'd like to echo the hustling tip. I mean, I've asked random strangers that I liked that had done it, some my age, some much older than I was. My favorite by far is this, I think he's 10 to 15 years older than me. We've never met. We meet via Zoom once a month, and we have no agenda, and I just ask him questions. He's not in finance, but he has done life. He has run businesses. So some of the advice, some of the questions I ask him are just general, what do you like about the people you work with? And he gives really practical responses that you can apply not only in life, but in business. So where I'm going with this is that your mentor doesn't have to be, you know, like a superstar in some field. Your mentor can be someone who's lived long enough to be able to answer and to be able to see when you're about to make a specific mistake. One of my other mentors is my children's nanny. She is the kindest and greatest person I have ever worked with. So at a personality level, she keeps me in check, and she gives really, really good advice on when things are going bad, this is what you do. When things are going bad, you should probably pray about it. When things are going bad, don't be an asshole, right? And so I would say almost create a quadrant, right? If you're treating yourself as a business, you're going to need someone who's going to help you with your personality, because your personality is what you carry with you. You need someone who's going to help you just remember those tips that you need when things are really, really stressful. But then importantly, think of the person that's also going to help you with your career in terms of practical accounting question. Who do I actually ask? Who has done it before and who can help me with this finance situation that I'm in? And then there's the other quadrant, which is your career and making sure that you do not pigeonhole yourself, because as you grow older, chances of you being scared to take risks are much higher. When I was straight out of university, I was incredibly arrogant. I didn't need anyone to plan my career for me. I said things like, I have an accounting degree. I'm not taking that job. It's beneath me. Now that I have 2 children, a husband, a mortgage, and car loans, I'm like, whoa, should I really do that? So you need someone who's also going to give you perspective. And so I'd fill those boxes with, it doesn't have to be a superstar. You can find them. You know these people probably. Just go ask them. They won't say no. We're very selfish as human beings. We love to mentor.
And maybe one thing to add is that I think it's important to have mentors, but also groups of, ambitious people, either men or women, maybe the same age as you, and you can talk about like similar challenges that you're facing. So yeah, maybe an additional thing to the mentoring, a bit different, but also worth building, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you all. This has been such a great session. We are out of time, unfortunately. I know I could keep going for a whole nother hour. It's been wonderful listening to your thoughts and your insights. And I think one of the key messages that we've heard here is keep connecting, keep networking, and CFO Connect is one of the best ways to do this. So if you're not already a member, do apply. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about Spendesk, Spendesk.com is the place to do it. And have a wonderful rest of your Women's History Month. And we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.